Hi, folks. Welcome back. Well, it looks like Democrats are doing the best impression of a frat house that just found out the keg was filled with truth serum. The left, once the self-proclaimed party of norms and democracy, is now throwing tantrums in federal press conferences like they're auditioning for the Real Housewives of Capitol Hill. Today, we've got a beautiful little meltdown starring Senator Alex Padilla, who apparently forgot both his ID and his dignity at the door, getting yeeted out of a DHS presser by Secret Service like he was trying to crash Elon Musk's parking spot at Tesla HQ. The irony, these are the same people who clutched their pearls over January 6th. So buckle up, because what we're about to watch isn't just peak hypocrisy, it's a masterclass in liberal delusion dressed up as righteous rebellion. Let's get into it.
Guys, ready and bell. Sir, hands up, hands up. I'm Senator Alex Padilla. I have questions for the Secretary, because the fact of the matter is a half a dozen violent criminals that you're rotating on your
I also want to
hands up.
How many of our ICE agents have been docked?
On the ground. Hands behind your back. Hands behind your back.
If you let my hands go, it's behind my back.
All right. Cool. Other hand. Lay flat. Lay flat.
Other hand, sir. Other hand.
There's no recording allowed out here. I did not know. There's no recording allowed out here per FBI rights for the building.
And needless to say, that clip went viral, and here are the facts behind it. Senator Padilla pulled a full-blown political stagecrasher moment at a DHS press conference in Los Angeles, got taken down by the feds like he was auditioning for a reboot of Cops, Capitol Edition, and then somehow walked away with Secretary Kristi Noem's phone number like it was a weird speed dating event for government dysfunction. According to the FBI, Padilla never identified himself, wasn't wearing his Senate pin, and disrupted formal remarks by the Secretary, which in Democrat speak just means he thought yelling at government agents mid-speech was going to earn him a standing ovation. Instead, he got tackled, detained, and released once they confirmed he wasn't just another LARPing activist from Silver Lake. Padilla, of course, used this opportunity to appear everywhere he could to farm this content to dust.
You guys have some questions. I'm going to read a brief statement. I will not be taking questions, but allow me to read my statement. I'm here in Los Angeles today, and I was here in the federal building, in the conference room, awaiting a scheduled briefing from federal officials as part of my responsibility as a senator to provide oversight and accountability. While I was waiting for the briefing with General Guillot, I learned that Secretary Noem was having a press conference a couple of doors down the hall. Since the beginning of the year, but especially over the course of recent weeks, several of my colleagues have been asking the Department of Homeland Security for more information and more answers on their increasingly extreme immigration enforcement actions. And we've gotten little to no information in response to our inquiries. And so I came to the press conference to hear what she had to say, to see if I could learn any new additional information. And at one point, I had a question. And let me emphasize, just as we've emphasized the right for people to peacefully protest and to stand up for their First Amendment rights, for our fundamental rights. I was there peacefully. At one point, I had a question. And so I began to ask a question. I was almost immediately forcibly removed from the room. I was forced to the ground, and I was handcuffed. I was not arrested. I was not detained. I will say this. If this is how this administration responds to a senator with a question, if this is how the Department of Homeland Security responds to a senator with a question, you can only imagine what they're doing to farm workers, to cooks, to day laborers out in the Los Angeles community and throughout California and throughout the country.
Oh, please. The goal was to disrupt. You don't ask a question by barging into a press conference mid-speech, especially in a city that spent the past week smoldering under the weight of anarchist street theater. We've had 6 straight days of activism that looked a lot like Third World Banana Republic dystopian hellhole complete with firebombs, assaults, barricades, all in protest of DHS arresting criminals with active deportation orders. Not mothers nursing babies, not fresh off the border asylum seekers, but people with years of due process who've already been told by courts that they don't belong here. And now Senator Alex Padilla, instead of doing his job, decides to crash a federal briefing uninvited, gets tackled by law enforcement for refusing to identify himself, and then gives a teary-eyed Oscar audition about just trying to ask a question. Spare us. This is clearly a manufactured spectacle because the modern left doesn't do governance anymore. It's all performance to them. Padilla knows the cameras are always rolling, and he chose to turn a national security press event into a one-man protest, and yet somehow he's the victim. That's the tell. Because what we're watching here isn't just a man grandstanding, it's an entire political class addicted to emotional manipulation. The logic goes like this. If you cry, you're right. If you invoke the downtrodden, your motives can't be questioned. They're full of merit and beautiful. If you're a Democrat, law enforcement restraint is oppression, even when they're enforcing the most basic expectations of order. But here's a deeper issue. This moment isn't just about Padilla. It's about a political culture that's lost the ability or the will to distinguish between the rule of law and performative resistance. We've cultivated a generation of leaders who think their feelings outrank the Constitution. We're told that storming a DHS presser is oversight somehow, while ICE agents enforcing court orders are fascists. Meanwhile, the media eats this stuff up, pretending this is some kind of civil discourse and not a clown show. Padilla's crocodile tears are just the latest symptom of a broader cultural rot. One where identity replaces merit, where disorder is mistaken for justice, and where the institutions meant to preserve a republic are hijacked by people who mistake melodrama for moral authority. The real tragedy isn't that he got tackled, it's that his stunt will probably earn him applause from the same people who spent years calling January 6th the end of democracy. Apparently, democracy is only sacred when it's their power being protected. And let's be honest for a second, what Padilla did wasn't brave, it wasn't principled, it was narcissism dressed up as protest. It was all for the TikTok vibe. And if this is what counts as leadership on the left, no wonder the country's tuning them out.
Más información de los representantes de la administración, especialmente porque desde el principio del término de Donald Trump, y especialmente esta última semana por lo que ha ocurrido aquí en la región de Los Ángeles, hemos pedido más información para entender las pólizas, las estrategias de la administración. Las respuestas han sido mínimas.
Oh, now that was the cherry on top. After getting cuffed for storming a federal press conference like an uninvited activist crashing a wedding, Senator Padilla decided the best move is to just start speaking Spanish during his press conference to no one in particular, with the fluency of a white liberal on Duolingo Day 3. And look, I wouldn't normally clown someone for struggling with a second language, but let's be real. This wasn't communication. It was just straight up theater. Padilla wasn't trying to clarify anything. He was just straight up performing. He wanted the optics. The brown man is speaking Spanish in chains like ICE just snatched a farm worker out of a taco truck. Never mind that he's a sitting U.S. senator who chose to escalate a situation and refused to identify himself properly. Never mind that the people being arrested in these DHS operations weren't innocent abuelitas. They were hardened criminals with years of due process. Padilla saw an opportunity to stage a scene, and he leaned in with the fake tears and the gringo español like he was gunning for a Telemundo highlight reel. This is what the modern left has been reduced to, folks. Aesthetics over substance, narrative over facts, and TikTok vibes over law. Identity is a costume you put on when it's convenient, especially if it means you can emotionally manipulate your base and guilt trip your opponents. Padilla wasn't speaking for the people when he was speaking in Spanish here. He was speaking at the cameras for the audience at home and the media that's going to cut this into this heartfelt moment of him connecting with his identity. And if you think this wasn't rehearsed, well, you haven't been paying attention.
First question, how are you? We all watched the video. We saw you taken to the floor by those
He's
agents.
fine.
How are you doing?
Come on.
Look, I'm okay. I've been on the phone off and on with kids, right? Because my kids, word travels fast in this day and age with technology to make sure they're okay. But I think most importantly is the outrage that I hope people feel. If this can happen to a United States senator for having the audacity to ask a question of the Secretary of Homeland Security, the same questions for and requests for information that we've had, not just the last sort of week or so of the activity in Los Angeles, but since the beginning of the administration, then just imagine what can happen to anybody in the country. For that matter.
Do you have to be the worst actor in history to qualify for public office now? Because watching Senator Padilla meltdown on national television, pretending that getting detained for storming a federal press conference was some kind of civil rights crucifixion was like watching a bad community theater version of Les Mis. But here's the real issue. Padilla's stunt is a symptom of something deeper, something that's hollowed out our institutions from the inside. See, not too long ago, when politicians disagreed with DHS policies, they issued subpoenas, held hearings, submitted oversight requests, but that's too slow. That's too boring. That doesn't go viral. So instead, they now manufacture a confrontation, feed it to their media allies, and spin the whole thing into a morality play where they're the victim of fascism for interrupting a press event without identifying themselves properly. And that's the playbook now. Perform neo-Marxist grievance regardless of context. Lean on identity regardless of substance. Cry about what could happen to anybody while leaving out the fact that most people don't have the privilege or audacity, to use his word, to weaponize their job title as a human shield after they break protocol. Padilla wasn't tackled for asking a question. He was removed because he attempted to publicly ambush the Secretary of Homeland Security during an active briefing while concealing his identity. That's not oversight. That's anarchic activism in a sweatsuit. Now, Padilla is trying to scare you with hypotheticals, saying, if this can happen to a senator, imagine what can happen to you. But the truth is, what happened to him should happen to anyone who tries to subvert protocol for political gain. That's not injustice. That's accountability. What we should really be asking is how many more elected officials are willing to burn down public trust just to make themselves look like heroes on TikTok? Because at this rate, the answer is way too many of the Democrats.
Let me make sure I understand that.
So the whole time, right? We're the whole time being escorted in this federal building by somebody from the National Guard, somebody from the FBI. I've gone through screening. This is a federal building. And so tell them, let's go listen to the press conference. They escort me over to that room. And I'm sitting in the back of the room behind the cameras, behind the reporters, listening. And at one point, it was just too much to take. Not the first, but the second attack on the political leadership of California and this notion that Donald Trump and Kristi Noem had to come in and rescue the people of Los Angeles from Gavin Newsom and Karen Bass. It was too much. And so I spoke up. I introduced myself and said I had a question. Look, they said I wasn't wearing my pin. My polo says United States Senate. There was no threat. There was no lunging. I raised my voice to ask a question, and it took, maybe half a second before multiple agents were on me.
Listening to Senator Padilla speak is like listening to someone narrate a bad improv skit they convinced themselves was a documentary. Every word is soaked in self-importance, selective memory, and emotional baiting. He claims he was peacefully sitting behind the cameras at a DHS press conference until it just got too emotionally overwhelming to hear people criticize Gavin Newsom and LA Mayor Karen Bass. So naturally, he stood up, interrupted the Secretary of Homeland Security mid-statement, and now expects us to believe he was simply the innocent bystander with a question. Oh, and the kicker, he thinks the agents should have magically known he was a senator because underneath his jacket, he was wearing a polo that said United States Senate. Apparently, he believes the Secret Service now doubles as the cast of X-Men and can see through clothing. Look, what we're watching is a collapse of credibility in our political class, especially on the left. This isn't an isolated incident, it's a pattern. They scream about our democracy while undermining every norm they once claimed to uphold. They cry about authoritarianism while treating institutions as props for their personal brand. They demand respect but show none for the processes that give them power in the first place. And worst of all, they rely on a media and cultural machine that lets them get away with all of this, amplifying their tears while burying their tactics. To be absolutely clear, Senator Padilla accomplished nothing but embarrassing himself. He revealed the rot. The fact that this stunt will likely be praised and is being praised by progressive circles, MSDNC, as some kind of brave resistance just shows how hollow their moral compass has become. This isn't about protecting constituents. This is about protecting the narrative. And the more theatrics like this we see, the clearer it becomes. The American left isn't fighting for the soul of democracy. They're auditioning for its funeral. So ask yourself this: when did leadership become performance art, and when did emotional theatrics replace accountability? What happens to a nation when truth is no longer something we pursue, but something we stage? The deeper danger here isn't one senator's meltdown. It's a system that rewards deception, punishes order, and teaches the public to trust feelings over facts. Are we so distracted by the noise that we've forgotten how to discern the signal? Because if every disruption is reframed as heroism and every lie wrapped in moral outrage, then the very institutions we rely on, law, governance, truth, become tools of manipulation. And if we can't see through the act, maybe the joke's on us. You tell me what you think in the comments down below. Have a terrific day. Peace.